So welcome to our discussion on the Dental Practice Buyer's Guide. Thank you for coming. What Ross and I wanted to do today, last year we wrote a Dental Practice Buyer's Guide, and obviously there's been a big shock to the system globally and obviously within the industry. So we wanted to review it and see what's changed, what hasn't, and how you should be looking at the potential purchase of a practice going forward. So we're going to keep it quite light. If you've got any questions, please do send them through. We've already got a few sent through, which is much appreciated. Also, if you've got anything that's a bit more kind of specific to your situation that you'd like to discuss afterwards, please book in a call with us, contact the business, and you can book in a call with us anytime. So I thought a good place to start, Ross, was a lot of the brokers in dentistry have been saying that there's been an uptick in associates looking to buy to protect their own jobs. What's your view on this as a strategy?
Yeah, we'll go deep quite quickly then. I think it's natural. We've seen fairly consistently associate rates have been suppressed over the period of shutdown and when we've reopened. So we've heard that sometimes it can drop as low as kind of 2/3 of their previous pay rate, which has consequence. So I'm mindful of that. I suppose I'd be cautious about practice ownership being a solution to that problem. I think there's always going to be a propensity to think that running a practice is mainly about clinical, which it largely is, because you're going to have to kind of grind it when you're in and you own your own practice and put in some clinical hours. But it's by far and away, it's not the only job role that you'll have. And I think it's those other parts of the job role that we believe that if you forego them, it's going to cost you dearly. Well, not necessarily cost you dearly, but you just got to realise your potential.
Okay, so I think as we talk through, we'll kind of illustrate some of these points as we get a bit deeper. But as a first thing, why would anyone in any time buy a dental practice, or why would they buy any business?
Well, to be honest with you, I think healthcare and dentistry is booming and will continue to boom. It's almost doubled in the GDP in dentistry has almost doubled over the last 10 years. And so I think the COVID has impacted things, and it will slow it down a little bit. But if it's at 2017 levels, that's still a very vibrant place to be. And we've got empirical evidence that the corporates and buyers still want to buy because, well, actually, our best placed practices are now generating pre-COVID turnover levels. So, there's a lot of logic there to say that's dentistry is still a great place to be, and a dental practice is still a good thing to buy. But maybe there's the nuances and the subtleties that we need to be careful with, that it shouldn't just be kind of a black and white decision. It's not just a case of, well, I was an associate, now I should be a practice owner.
I think that's it. There was a big kind of myth that we used to spend a lot of time trying to dispel, that almost to get your promotion in dentistry, you had to become a practice owner. And we really didn't think that was a case. It's almost like having a complete career change. In fact, it's very much like that. So we used to kind of say it was a decision between being a business person or a dentist. Yes, you'll still have to do dentistry, but we think that decision's more and more polarized now going forward. And actually, that's why when we think about why you'd buy a dental practice, Ross has given a pretty kind of categorical market example of why we'd do it. And the fact is, it's a great industry to be in that's growing and fairly sustainable, even in the face of clear kind of risk and uncertainty. We quite like to strip it back to actually, why are you personally buying a practice? And the metrics that we use are income, so how much you're getting paid, wealth, what assets you're creating, time, so that's time in any respect, so how much time you're trying to dedicate or how much time it creates for you, and possibly the most abstract one is gratification. And we obviously can't tell you what gives you gratification, only you can try and figure that out. So Ross, how do you go about looking at these things, and do you think most purchases are done under these terms, or why do most people purchase?
Well, in fairness, the people, the practice owners that choose to work with us, we do cycle through our own methodology to help kind of categorize and classify and try and work out which ones are most important or not. I guess that's the only kind of non-negotiable. You're not going to get all four of them, because you just don't. There's always some kind of compromise in some way, shape or form in this world. So working out which ones are more important to you or less important to you is going to be quite rich. It's rich information to have at this point in time. And sometimes it takes a bit of digging. Sometimes it needs us involved, because sometimes people aren't truthful to themselves. So there's ways that we can kind of really kind of nurture which ones are actually going to be most important. We got the luxury of an outsider's viewpoint to that extent.
Absolutely. I mean, when you leave school, the only one of those variables you've got to trade is time. So you kind of you trade your time to train to do something and forego kind of getting income from just going straight into the workforce. So as you move through your career, so as an associate, you've got really great income, whether you know it or not. You've got kind of globally based a fantastic income stream, and a fantastic percentage of what you deliver comes back to you. So it's a really great job. But what you're thinking of doing now, you're thinking of trading some of that income for some of the other variables possibly. So the first question that people tended to ask us, and it hasn't necessarily been the same over the past few months, has been, will I be able to get finance for a practice? Which it's not the worst question. It's kind of an obvious question, but do you want to kind of elaborate on why we think it's maybe not the right question, Ross?
Well, because it's a desirable industry to be in, you've got banks falling over to lend to dentists pre-COVID. I think they still want to be in the industry, but they're being a little bit more selective now. And banks, will universally look through the lens of risk, and it's a difficult concept actually to kind of assimilate into your day-to-day world. But at the moment, for example, having many conversations with the bank, and they're saying, no, we're happy to lend to that practice if you can show us how you're mitigating the risk. And how do we mitigate it? Well, we might keep a bit more back, but we might want to wait a period of time. And it's always quite difficult when you see something nice and bright and shiny. You want to move straight away, but that doesn't necessarily always kind of dovetail together with the bank's perspective on risk. But broadly speaking, yes, you can achieve the finance. That's not really the right question, though. The question still is, should you do it? Because we've seen some pretty daft kind of financial models produced over the years where, in order to get the finance, you have to, there's always some kind of compromise. Often the financial models only ever stack up if you tweak that little line in the forecast, which reduces your drawings, and that lifts the bank's comfort levels, but it reduces your own personal withdrawal levels, which, yes, it might be something you want to do, but again, to kind of bring it back to the objectives is helpful, because actually maybe one of the objectives you really wanted in the short term was more income, because you got kids, you want to do this, you want to do X, Y, Z. Well, actually, you're kind of taking a course of strategy which is really severely going to impinge on that. So, it's, yes, you can get the finance, roughly speaking. You're going to have to put some skin in the game. You can't just turn up with empty pockets. But it's the better question is, should you get the finance?
Yeah. So, a kind of phrase to have in your head is just because you can doesn't mean you should. So let's say you do proceed. Now we're going to start looking at, let's say, we've got our money together, we've found the practice, and we're ready to take it on board. We fundamentally believe that actually you have to grow that practice. And that's when you'll start to be able to actually meet some of your objectives and make sense of taking, £1 million worth of debt on board, which is no small thing to consider. So growth-wise, Ross, why is it such a commercial fundamental to start with?
Well, it's only a logical commercial fundamental, if that makes sense. I think it's, if the way I phrase it is, if you want to carry out a charitable venture, then it's a perfect place to put £1 million. If you're not kind of alert to it, if you see a beautiful practice around the corner for your house, then you're kind of clouding the commercial decision with your own personal objectives. Because actually, from a macro view, the finances are relatively straightforward. Dentistry in itself, from a financial perspective, is relatively straightforward. We know if we've got X pounds of turnover, say £1 million, the cost structures in a dental practice are almost uniform across the board. A little bit of kind of variations for, in terms of pay rates, but actually from a kind of an overview, fairly straightforward. And you'll probably kind of hear, kind of benchmarks of 20% of turnover is the profit. EBITDA is the very kind of commonly used phrase. You might hear 20% profit is the kind of the norm, but I think that's almost the glossy version of the norm, if that makes sense. The real version of the norm is usually, well, it can be as little as 5, 6, 7, 8%. So if we assume just for a moment that you've got a half decently run practice with the right efficiency of staff and the right structure of turnover, the right kind of modalities offered, then you could probably be looking at kind of 10% profitability. So if you've got £1 million practice, most people kind of know, most sophisticated buyers or practice owners will know roughly what kind of profit they can get out of that. And it will be, let's say, 10%. I'm using 10% because it makes the maths a bit easier for me at this moment. But, if you've got £1 million turnover, we know roughly that the profit levels will probably be in the region of kind of 100K. Well, actually, bearing in mind that practice might sell for £1.3 million, that was probably the broad kind of metrics throughout 2018, 2019. Did creep upwards a bit further, to be fair. But if we've got a £1.3 million investment in a practice and £1.3 million bank loan, let's say, and over 15 years, just repaying the capital is going to cost you 85K a year. So you can see that if you marry your expected profit levels, i.e. 100K, against the annual debt repayment, 85K, a bit of tax as well, which will, we've got to kind of factor in. You can kind of see that buying a practice doesn't intrinsically deliver you income improvements.
No. It does deliver you a lot more issues, though, doesn't it?
Challenges, we like to say.
Yeah, challenges. Well, you've got a whole team to run. You've got more patients that you're accountable for. So kind of given that, if you've spent that £1 million to get a return, the revenue has to grow, very simply, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan and I, we intrinsically don't believe that any business should be static. Static is dying, in our opinion. So it's got to grow anyway, otherwise you're naturally going to fall behind. But if that wasn't enough, then I've given you the maths that kind of proves it. I think NHS practices can, if they're structured correctly, can be more profitable. So you might be getting a slightly higher profit margin than what I was alluding to. But to be honest with you, all that happens if you end up with a higher profit margin is that the price goes up. So they are intrinsically kind of interlinked. That fundamentally, I think it's good if the expectation is when you buy a practice, well, the very first thing you've got to do is improve it and enhance it in some way. Otherwise, you will just slowly and gradually be kind of falling behind. Mm-hmm. And I think that normally comes because the practice owner ends up subsidising the practice in any number of ways, either through their labour hours, often through their labour hours. Sometimes it's because they grant rent-free periods to the practice because they own the property as well. Sometimes it's because the spouse might work in the business as well. There's any number of ways that we end up with this kind of really weird, distorted financial model, but it's just all due to subsidisation.
Yeah. So essentially they might be earning the same that they'd be earning if they're an associate, but they're doing tons of extra work to keep the business running, which they don't earn anything for. And that's really, really common. That, that we kind of see that all the time.
Well, the risk is conveniently overlooked as well. So if you ask any practice owner about risk, about their burden of running a practice through the shutdown period, it's not been good for anyone. But whilst associates they've had a pretty rotten time, but practice owners have had it as well, essentially because they've had 10 or 15 or 20 people that are reliant upon them, and that's a heavy burden to bear often.
Yeah. So kind of given, I don't want to. It sounds like we're painting a bit of a kind of bleak picture for it. It is exciting, but we we want you to have these realizations before you turn up at the front door and you've signed the check.
Yeah.
We want you to have realized all this stuff before you get there. So remembering, we do think it's a great investment. So if we're looking at what type of practice to buy, broadly speaking, there's kind of three types that the market sees. There's NHS, there's private, and there's mixed practices. Given what we've been speaking about before, what do we think are the wise choices here, Ross?
Well, there's no black and white answer. I will say that. I think it's convenient where, as human beings, we do prefer kind of black and white answers because it makes life a bit simpler. It's another decision we don't have to make. Lots of decisions we do have to make as we chart our course through life. And it'd be great to be able to say, no, everyone's buying NHS practices now because it's guaranteed income, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it is more subtle than that. They are, in my opinion, fundamentally different businesses requiring fundamentally different skill sets. So there's a home for everyone, and I think it's horses for courses, really. And I think it's important to understand and appreciate that. It's probably as different as, buying a pub versus buying a shoe shop. There are different consumer habits that you'll have from either different demographics to the area you're operating in. I don't want to kind of, it would just be wrong on so many levels to say you should buy this or that. I think fundamentally that practice will be a success or not due to the skills and the growth probably of that principle as a leader in the business. Mathematically, though, I don't mind what you choose, but I've just given you the logic that we need to grow it.
So given that, Ross, wouldn't that mean a private is more desirable just because you can grow a private rather than an NHS? I think the thing that we used to find quite a lot is because they are two different businesses, one kind of limits the other. So what's right for one isn't right for the other. So, I don't want to be too kind of polarizing on it, but if you're looking to grow, is it easier, would you say, with a private practice or not?
Not if you don't have the skill set to grow a private practice. If you've got the skill set to grow an NHS or a mixed practice, then that's what you should probably do. But they are two different growth strategy. I think your overall kind of strategy for the business as well is important. Are you looking to build this practice over 20 years or 10 years, or are you kind of looking to grow it and sell it in 3 years? All of those kind of play parts. I think, the growth the GDP growth that we've seen in dentistry over the last decade, it has come from elective treatment, cosmetic elective treatment, short-term orthodontics, facial aesthetics, implant work as well. So that's where you will see the large growth. That's not to say you can't grow a practice that can't harness all of those aspects. It's just going to be slower growth. So again, you've got to kind of weave that into your kind of your assessment, I suppose.
Okay. What's your feeling on mixed practices now?
I don't know is the answer. There's just so much uncertainty there. I suppose I've got the opinion that I can't see that the government's going to release more funding for NHS work in dentistry over the medium term. I find it difficult to imagine there's anything other but a very sterling attempt to create a good narrative that means that essentially they're pouring less money into the NHS pot. Bearing in mind, they're probably looking at, this is the leaders of this country, they're probably looking at saying, well, actually, there's a fairly buoyant private practice industry there. They probably uniformly overlooked them during the shutdown period with any kind of financial support. But I see it hard to imagine there's just going to be a constant evolution towards pushing dental work privately. I think there'll probably be a core provision of service so that those who really desperate need get access to it. But I think if you talk with any NHS practice owner, they're probably feeling versions of the same thing as what I'm saying there. So it's then probably just a question of timing. Do you convert now? Do you convert in the future? Do you wait until the conversion's pushed upon you or not?
Yeah.
I think as a business owner, I'm always a bit uncomfortable if I'm forced into doing something rather than, making the choice myself.
Well, when we do the kind of income, wealth, time gratification, like work with people, often what comes up is some level of autonomy. That's why they wanted to buy a practice. That's why they own a practice, that you have some kind of ownership. The issue with the NHS is, it's great while they're paying you. We do have some questions about the profitability, but we'll save them for another day. But they could also just change the contract. It happened with orthodontics, and a number of our clients actually just said, we can't service orthodontics anymore. So that decision was out of their hands. So
that's quite risky. That's, to bring that word into it again, that's one big customer you got who can just clobber you around the back of the neck.
It's better to have 3,000 customers than one massive customer who can do what they like and take their business elsewhere. But again, that's
having said that, 3,000 customers sounds like a bit of a nightmare as well. But from a perspective,
So the other bit for you to reflect on and think about is what you're bringing to the party. So quite often, particularly if someone's got specialism, they're kind of saying, well, I can come in and I can do implants in the practice. And that is true. You'll probably be able to add revenue value to the business by doing implants. But that's not actually what you're bringing to the party. What you're bringing to the party is yourself as a leader, and that might be a good or a bad thing. So you've got to think about, you're buying the business to grow it, and you are buying the business to change it. You're not someone who's kind of taking it as a long-term invest. Well, depending on who you are, generally people are going in to develop that business. So you've got to think about what your skill set is and what you're bringing to the table, and how you can develop that business going forward. So you may have a particular communication skill. You maybe have an interest in marketing. You may be great with numbers, but you're probably not going to have it all. So it's really worth kind of reflecting on what you do have, and thinking about that, and then starting to think about what you'd need to kind of invite to the party, what type of people you'll need in there. Broadly, there's a few functions in any business. So there's sales and marketing, so that's a requirement. There's operations, there's finance, and then kind of in the middle of that, permeating it all, there's people. So you have a requirement to service all these kind of pillars of the business. And if you don't, you probably won't make much progress. So what we'd always say, the worst thing we can hear when someone's buying a practice is, I want to get in there, kind of get my feet under the desk and just see what's going on. It's kind of the wrong attitude to have, because you'll just waste time. You won't get any progress that way. You won't earn enough money probably, and you'll actually create patterns which are much harder to break. So we're not saying come into the business and be like Gordon Ramsay, going into someone's kitchen, kind of turning everything up and throwing stuff at them and shouting at them. That's not what we're suggesting at all. But you come in and you kind of need to make it clear from the start that you're coming in to help the business grow and to help everyone kind of create a better organization. So often overlooked, but important to think about, what are you bringing to the party and what are your skill sets as a leader?
I suppose in one way, Dan, to be fair, almost the more that's broken, the more opportunity there is there.
I didn't want to kind of go too hard on it, but if you're asking me what type of practice I'd buy, it would be a really terribly run, underperforming private practice, because actually that's got more to fix in it, so I'll pay less for it. There's more room to grow, more to develop, and then the returns are significantly higher. So you're seeing some of my own biases come through there, which maybe I should or shouldn't have said, but that's looking at my own income, wealth, time, and gratification things. That's what would suit me the best.
Dan, hi Ross. There's something that I would wanting to ask. So basically, I get your point. Buying a private practice is much more. If it's a bad run practice, you come out there, you reform the place, and you can have a tremendous growth. But I think it depends where exactly is your practice. So, for example, if I live in the Greater London and if I'm looking for a private practice, you really need to have something to get people through your door. No, you have to spend substantially on because there's so much competitions within a 1 kilometer radius. You will have 10 other clinics for all you know. So that's the reason I think the NHS one kind of helps you. And again, as you said, the skills kit definitely helps because NHS does not provide everything under the roof. And as Ross mentioned, there's a quite surge in the cosmetic treatments, basically the short term or the other cosmetic treatments recently. So you can have the people coming in through the NHS part, which is a fixed income that gives you the bread and butter, not necessarily higher profits, but you can upscale them or at least make them aware of the new things that are on the cosmetic sides, and then you can have the growth on that aspect. So probably the things to look at, the way I am thinking, and I'm not an expert, that okay, look for a clinic which is kind of mixed, not totally NHS, and which is not good profitability but has a good UDAs or the people coming in, and then you can expand the private side of business on there, but at least you are not worried that much of getting people through the door. Because if you go for a private practice, I think my main struggle would be that, okay, you'll really have to be hard on getting the place up and running to get the customers through. Like in the recent years, most of the dental clinics were really profitable. They used to be whitening, hygiene, but now with the vouchers, Groupons and stuff, people normally go for that. And the retention of the customer base is not there. Yes, of course, if you are a private clinic which has a good patient base and you have implants, if you do 5 all in for implants a month, you can have a big profit growth that you straight away can't compare with the NHS. But to get that kind of a patient base, where in current world the most of the private run practices are run by corporates, they spend humongous amount of money in advertisement and getting people through the door, and they definitely, if they are corporates, they're well established, and people would want to, if you're spending that amount of money, you'd be like, that looks better, that is better, let's go there rather than you guys.
Thank you for the question, Sam. The bit about the corporates, it's not true. Sorry, it's an illusion. They're not the best at marketing by quite a long distance, and actually they often acquire practices that are good at marketing. But your point is correct that a huge part, if I'm saying I'd want a fixer-upper, as it were, a massive part of the investment in that business, the money I'd saved on buying a cheaper practice, and it might be up to 100 grand a year, would be spent on marketing, bringing in those high value, high ticket treatments. So that part of your analysis is absolutely bang on, that you will have to market and you will have to develop the business to get that return. If you're looking at growing a private list and getting the high value treatments from the NHS, in theory, that should work okay. In practice, we rarely see it actually working, because what you're kind of saying is, we're going to give you a full-time job which pays you all right, but it'll pay you reliably. And then you've got to find time to moonlight to do all this high value treatment, which you've also got to find and sell. So what happens is people are just so busy servicing their NHS contract that they actually don't do it very well. And we've seen, hundreds and hundreds of practices, and many of them being mixed. And actually, when you do the analysis, they remember the one case of Invisalign they sold last year to one NHS patient. But when you look at it at a macro level, they rarely do it well. We have seen some that do it well, but that's 3. I can think of 3 practices. 2 of them are owned by the same people. So
I will say it won't end up badly.
Yes.
And that's probably the kind of the key point to it, that, bearing in mind, we're talking about GDP in dentistry having doubled factually over a decade. Perhaps our barometer of, in fact, the barometer of success for any practice owner who's buying should be greater than 10 or 20% growth. 10 or 20% growth is quite modest for all the efforts and the energy and the emotion that you'll kind of commit to the venture. So I think there's a part of, there's a very kind of astute part of what you were analysing there, which is about the brand position, though, as well. And you didn't use those kind of words, but you were commenting about how it's effectively going to be kind of a struggle to get those kind of patients who want to pay more. That's about brand position, and I think it's often overlooked as to what market position a dental practice will take. You don't realise it, but a customer will make judgments on, if you use, even if you don't put the word NHS on your front sign or on your website, if you use NHS colours, they will assume you're NHS. If you use the word NHS and private treatments, they will just see the word NHS. So all of these kind of subtle cues are about how you communicate with your customers. You don't have to do this, but I think we're just saying that, you know, you are marketing, you're just not doing it very well by not spending on it, not by being alert to it, not by steering your practice's market position in the way that you want it to. So I wouldn't assume that, you mentioned kind of Greater London there. We think it's a great place to be, mostly because most other practices are fairly rubbish at what they do. There are lots of them around, but they are mostly rubbish. They're not doing bad. They're okay. They're surviving. But it's quite possible to get in, find the fixer upper as Dan wants, and double their turnover in 18 months, 24 months. Really is possible.
I had a few friends who are in the dentistry and who own a practice in Greater London. So one of the person that I know is basically based in Camden. So it's quite close to Harley Street. They have expanded, so they had a tremendous growth, but they still continue to struggle because, again, for the high niche, talking about the implants that you were talking about, any implant patients would rather, if they're paying that sort of money, they're like, okay, if I'm ready to shell out 4K, I'd rather spend 4.5K and go to Harley Street rather than. And it's very difficult because even if you look at Harley Street, say if you're looking to buy a dental clinic, there are 40 clinics in Harley Street. So that branding and everything is really,
Harley Street is a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anything around that is for me. I want to buy a clinic. So for me, it was like, okay, should I invest in a mixed? Of course, the mixed, as you said, it's much more expensive. Also, private would be better off. That okay, you can start off low and you can look at the good potential, building up the brand, doing the marketing, and with the changes in the NHS that you are hearing that okay, most of the treatments would be private and would be
Sam, I think just because we've got other people on the line, I think if you can get in contact with us, because we're kind of illustrating the point that it's very personal to you and very personal to what you want to do, but none of what you're saying is wrong. But there's definitely no situation where you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to commit to what your compromise is going to be going forward. So it's a perfect illustration.
Yeah, probably just to wrap it up, I think what I'm interpreting is it's safer to buy a mixed practice, but it's safer in the short term. I think what we'd assert is it's more risky in the long term, because at some point, you know, you've got to kind of deal with the situation. So probably better leave that if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Thank you, Sam. So kind of finally, what we wanted to cover off is, I mean, there's not much to it, but are there any kind of new opportunities in the market? So at the start, I asked Ross, knowing the answer, do we think it's a good idea to buy a practice to protect your job? And hopefully we've kind of said, as we've talked through, that because that is maybe not the best reason to do it, or there should be better reasons to do it. So if that's not in mind, are there any reasons, given the changes in the industry, why it would be a better reason to move in now? And we're starting to see them, I suppose. So whereas prices were kind of at a genuinely historic high, literally the day before, I think things started to change around March 13th for us, and we were seeing some amazing sales go through. We've actually seen some amazing sales go through in post-corona, actually, kind of recently, but they've tended to be really large practices that have a great brand position, that have great operations, and the purchasers now are looking at a good business rather than just buying revenue and profit. So we don't really exactly know what's happening with the kind of vast majority of the market, which is probably kind of £1 million downwards, and the types of practice you'd be looking at buying. But we're starting to get some inklings through that some principals that may have been happy to kind of work a bit longer to get a better price and happy to work an earn out are now just looking for quicker exits. So they're willing to take more hits on price. So it hasn't had a market-wide effect yet. So we don't know exactly where it'll end up. But we've definitely seen, we've seen practices kind of going for or accepting offers at less than half of their previous corona turnover because they didn't have the energy to rebuild the practice back up to sell it.
I'd probably kind of say I don't want people to focus only on this ingredient, but a common ingredient is, how much of the revenue the principal generates. The evidence that we've got about deals that we're now concluding is that they're deals in which the principal might be 30 or 40% of the revenue practice. They got infrastructure behind them. They got their brand position absolutely solidly in the marketplace. They've got the business manager in place who helps run the team. They've got, kind of decentralized command functions, all those kind of ingredients which are normal in any other business. And those are the deals that are happening. The kind of the mid-market deals where it's very principal-led. The principal is the engine behind everything: turnover, the administration, the keeping a happy team together. Those are the ones that they're kind of finding the more difficult, because the buyers are just kind of saying, well, it's just riskier. How do we get you out of it and someone else into it, if that makes sense? So that's it's a bit Wild West, I think, is probably the way of putting it down.
Yeah, that's it. So again, it's not the only way of looking at it, but if I was an associate looking for an opportunity, I would start figuring out all the stuff we've been talking about today. So why you want to buy a practice, what your metrics are, how long do you want to put into it? Would you like to exit in 2 years or 15 years? All of these things, starting to flush out actually what your kind of purpose is, and then you can start to think about strategy, and then just keeping an eye on the market, because it will change. It definitely will change. And some more weird things are going to happen because we haven't actually started the recession yet, so we don't know what that means. So kind of it's exciting, but don't kind of just wait for the practice to come up. I'd start planning now. Possibly the other thing that we've seen as a market opportunity is the ability to change practices has changed quite radically. So we're about to enter a period where there's going to be massively high unemployment. So you're going to have greater staff engagement in the business, whereas generally, because when there's low unemployment, it's quite hard to develop the team. There's opportunities to radically change the clinical model. So if you were looking at making your treatment a lot more profitable, we're working on a number of kind of R&D projects, I guess, to figure out the best way of doing that. Is it kind of therapist-led? Do you kind of have an apprentice dentist? All these different ideas that, because the market was so stable before, it was kind of stagnant as well. And there was no real need to fundamentally change how dentistry was delivered, because it also paid well. So there's definitely going to be something happening with prices. We can't predict how much, but kind of keep your eyes open. And there's way more opportunities to be innovative as a dental practice leader, which, if that excites you, you're the right person to be buying a dental practice, is probably what I'd say.
Yeah. I think probably a nice way to kind of wrap up. We've got a number of programs that we've got available for associates who are thinking of buying, or even principals who are thinking about buying other sites as well. I think it's our belief that, if you're going to buy a practice, you've really got to hit the ground running. So, our programs are there to help. If you're 12 months away from doing a deal, we've got a particular kind of program we can help you with, so that we can kind of get you to a position where you're ready to hit the ground running. If you're at the point where you've got a couple of practices you've got an eye on, then there's a more dedicated service as well where we can help you appraise, but both yourself, as Dan has been kind of stating, but also appraise the practices as well to give you our kind of independent viewpoint. So there's a couple of different programs we got for people depending on how far away they are from thinking about this kind of stuff. So love to help you. Make contact as you wish.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for attending, and hopefully catch up soon. Cheers.